The smell of engine oil and the salty tang of the sea breeze have been etched into every wrinkle on my hands for the past 40 years. I am Elias, 65 years old, a weathered marine mechanic working at this harbor, where the waves constantly murmur. These rough hands have dismantled thousands of rusty machines and saved countless sinking ships, yet they were utterly powerless to hold onto the life of the woman I loved most. Martha, my wife, left me and our son 5 years ago after a long, desperate battle with a vicious cancer. But my grief over losing my wife perhaps couldn't compare to the ultimate sacrifice made by Leo, my son. That year, Leo was only 27. He didn't hesitate to throw away his admission letter and a full scholarship to a prestigious university, returning to work day and night alongside me in the deafening machine shop to shoulder the mountain of medical bills. Leo didn't just give up his future, he sacrificed a part of his own body. He decided to donate a kidney to his mother in a fragile hope of prolonging her life. The transplant didn't bring the miracle we prayed for, but it permanently left a large, jagged, and inflamed scar across Leo's abdomen. The boy went from a robust young man to someone frail and sickly. Piercing abdominal cramps frequently tormented him whenever the weather turned or he overworked himself. I will never forget the moment before she closed her eyes, when Martha used her last breath to slip her tarnished gold engagement ring into my hand. Her eyes bore into mine with sharp anxiety. Elias promised me, "Keep this ring and protect Leo. His heart is too pure. He always gives without knowing how to keep anything for himself." I'm terrified the world will tear our son apart. I nodded, swearing on my life. But at that moment, I never imagined her heartbreaking dying words would come true so quickly, and that the villain would be the very woman sharing my son's bed. Clara entered Leo's life like a blinding but completely artificial flash of light. She was a social media KOL, an influencer who preached about financial freedom, a prosperity mindset, and high-class lifestyles to garner attention. On the surface, in her short videos, Clara always played the role of a modern, forgiving, and understanding wife. But only at home, away from the camera lenses, could I clearly see the disgusted frown on her face whenever Leo returned in his grease-stained mechanic overalls. What I hated most was how Clara looked at the transplant scar on her husband's stomach. There was no pity, no sympathy, no appreciation for that monumental sacrifice. Her eyes would just glaze over it with a cold contempt, as if she were looking at a broken, crippled object. Clara's ruthless manipulation reached its peak a year ago. Late one night, she came home, collapsed into Leo's arms, and sobbed hysterically like a mad woman. She claimed she had just suffered a miscarriage, and the reason she gave was like a poisoned dagger thrust straight into my son's chest. "It's the pressure, Leo. It's because we are so impoverished. Because I have to exhaust my mind figuring out how to make money to care for your sickly body. The baby couldn't survive in such a destitute life, reeking of poverty." Leo broke down completely. He fell to his knees in the middle of the living room, clinging tightly to Clara's legs, crying so hard his body shook, like shards of glass were tearing apart his chest. Driven by guilt over his poor health and the deep insecurity of a man unable to provide for his wife, Leo did something insane. He quietly mortgaged all the deeds to the speedboat repair shop he had built with his own hands, taking out a massive loan just to buy Clara a luxury car and a slew of designer bags. Leo, naive and foolish, believed those luxury goods would heal the psychological trauma of his pitiful wife. That night, my feet felt rooted to the floor in the dark corner of the hallway, as I silently watched my son drain his last drops of blood to cater to a woman's bottomless greed. The intuition of an old mechanic who had spent a lifetime seeing through the rot of broken machines told me this. Clara's tears tonight bore no salty taste of a mother mourning her child. They only reeked of the foul stench of deceit. But I had to endure it. I clenched my fists, biting my lip until it bled, forcing myself to step back into the shadows, because I knew that if I exposed my suspicions right then, Leo's world would collapse. I needed proof, proof ruthless and sharp enough to surgically sever this malignant tumor on its own, before it could completely drain my son's life force. Human greed is like a swamp. The more you struggle, the deeper you sink, and it never knows when to stop. When the luxury car and designer bags were no longer enough to satisfy Clara's black hole of vanity, she began eyeing things further out of reach. One Sunday evening during dinner, Clara picked up a piece of meat for me, wearing the same sweet, fake smile she often flashed in her online videos. Then she dropped a line, her voice as casual as could be. "Dad, I heard the title to storage yard no. 4 at the edge of the harbor is in your name. That place is full of rusty scrap metal, abandoned for years. What a waste. Land prices are going up. Why don't you let me handle it? I know some excellent real estate investors." I chewed slowly, never taking my eyes off my plate. Yard no. 4 was a barren plot of land, fenced off by rusted corrugated iron and heavy chains. I had never mentioned it to Clara, and Leo couldn't care less about it. Why would a woman who only cared about perfume and virtual trading floors suddenly take an interest in a scrap yard? "It's just an old parts warehouse, dear. Let me think about it," I replied vaguely, concealing the intense vigilance flaring up in my veins. First thing the next morning, I secretly contacted a seasoned private investigator I used to know. I needed to know exactly what my daughter-in-law was hiding beneath that perfect facade. While waiting for the investigator's results, an accidental discovery dealt me the first fatal blow. That day, Leo had asked me to come over to fix a leaking sink pipe. As I was hunched under the basin, my eyes caught Clara's open jewelry box on the shelf. Sitting prominently in the center was the wedding ring, the sacred keepsake Martha had handed down, the very ring Leo had tenderly slipped onto Clara's finger on their wedding day. A chilling premonition rushed to my brain. I am a veteran mechanic. I've handled metal my entire life. When I picked up the ring, it felt as though someone were ruthlessly crushing my heart. The weight was entirely wrong. The way the stone reflected light was wrong. It was too light. With all my years of experience, I painfully realized this was merely a cheap alloy fake plated in gold, set with a zirconia stone. The real ring, the keepsake soaked in my wife's sweat and tears, her final promise, was gone. 3 days later, the private detective met me at a quiet coffee shop and threw a thick file onto the table. What was inside that file didn't just answer the question about the ring. It shattered every limit of human cruelty I had ever known. "Your daughter-in-law is drowning in massive debt from crypto exchanges," the detective said around a cigarette, flipping through the pages of evidence. "She pawned the real gold ring on the black market half a year ago to try and win her money back, but lost it all." But what made me freeze, my chest aching as if someone were using iron pliers to drain the air from my lungs, was a medical certificate clipped to the back of the file. What about her miscarriage? My voice trembled, my throat turning bitterly dry. The detective shook his head, a glint of pity in his eyes. Mr. Elias, she was never pregnant. The medical records are forged. The ultrasound is a fake she bought online for $20. The whole miscarriage act was just psychological manipulation to force your son to mortgage the shop. She needed the money to buy that luxury car and those bags, just to keep up appearances on social media, all to lure more people into her crypto schemes. The world spun around me. The image of Leo kneeling in the living room, clutching Clara's legs, sobbing with guilt on that fateful night replayed like a slow-motion movie. My boy, my son who threw away his future, cut out a kidney, endured agonizing physical pain every single day, was being deceived, trampled on, and bled dry to the bone by the woman he loved most. Anger exploded inside me, boiling like magma. I wanted to storm into that house right then, hurl the file into Clara's face, and drag her by the neck out of my son's life. But then I stopped. If I threw this truth at him now, what would happen to Leo? He loved her too much. With his sensitive heart and frail body, the shock of this brutal betrayal, compounded by the agony of realizing his child never existed, might kill him. Leo wouldn't believe it, or worse, it would drive him mad. No, tears and an exposé weren't enough. A cunning demon like Clara would find a way to deny it, would play the victim all over again. I had to make her tear off her own mask. I had to make Leo see with his own eyes, hear with his own ears, the cold-blooded nature of that woman. Only then could this toxic root be pulled out entirely. I wiped my face, brushing away the cloudy tear of a father whose heart was bleeding, paid the detective, and walked out of the cafe. The pain had frozen into an icy calm. The game was only just beginning. Returning from the meeting with the detective, I forced myself to wear the face of a harmless old mechanic. I still went over to Leo's for dinner, still nodded along as Clara babbled her fake get-rich philosophies. But deep inside, every one of my senses was strung tight as a wire, waiting for the moment to strip away that hideous mask. The second crisis struck not long after, an inevitable consequence of the financial gutting. It was a Thursday morning. I was helping Leo inspect the engine of a client's speedboat when a massive tow truck rolled into the yard. The driver, his face stone cold, waved an asset seizure warrant and demanded to haul away the shop's most expensive air compressors and hydraulic winch systems. The reason: 3 months of overdue loan payments. Leo stood frozen, the color draining from his face. He frantically called Clara, the one who held total control over the shop's finances. 20 minutes later, Clara sped in, driving her luxury car recklessly. She put on a perfectly executed display of panic, crying, throwing a fit, cursing the bank's incompetence, blaming it all on a glitch in the automatic payment system. Through a few tearful calls begging for an extension, she managed to secure a 30-day grace period. The machinery was temporarily spared. Leo sighed in relief, hugging his wife to comfort her. But catching the flash of absolute terror in Clara's eyes, I knew the noose had begun to tighten around her neck. Scammers always look perfect until they are backed into a corner. That evening, using a blown fuse at home as an excuse, Clara insisted they sleep over at my house. I knew full well she wasn't afraid of the dark. She was just taking advantage of the isolation of my harbor house to easily contact her accomplices without walls having ears. At exactly 2:00 a.m., The sound of stealthy footsteps echoed in the hallway. Through the crack in my bedroom door, I saw Clara's silhouette slip out to the front porch. What she didn't know was that right above her head was the smart doorbell camera I had installed myself a month prior. To her, an old man constantly covered in grease was a technological dinosaur. She let her guard down, and that was her fatal mistake. I sat in the dark room, opening the app on my phone. The night vision was crystal clear, and the highly sensitive microphone picked up every single breath. The person on the other end picked up. It wasn't the threatening tone of a debt collector, but a deep, mocking male voice. "Clara, babe, have you sorted out the bank issue at your dummy husband's shop yet?" I froze, babe. Clara hissed, stripping away every ounce of her usual delicate demeanor. "Marcus, knock off the jokes. The bank almost hauled the machines away. If his shop closes, where are we going to find the legal cash flow to finish laundering the dirty money from the exchange? Don't forget we're in the same boat." A chill ran down my spine. Marcus. That name wasn't in the detective's file under the category of a debt collector. He was an anonymous crypto fraud kingpin. And Clara wasn't some stupid victim who lost her money. She was his mistress, his accomplice. They had planned to use Leo's clean business accounts to turn illegal scam money into clean cash. Marcus's voice came through clearly over the phone speaker. "Relax, babe. Once we process this last batch, we'll take the money and fly to Europe. But what about your husband? If the cops raid that shop, he might rat you out." Clara's next words were like meat cleavers, hacking my heart to pieces. "You worry too much. That old fool Elias and my crippled husband are as stupid as they come. He loves me so blindly. When everything blows up, all the transaction records will be in Leo's name. Let him go to prison for us. I just need the money to leave this port that stinks of oil and grease. Just thinking about having to sleep next to a sick freak with that hideous transplant scar on his stomach every night makes me want to vomit." The phone screen went black. I sat motionless in the quiet darkness, feeling as though the blood in my veins had been drained and replaced with ice. My son's sacrifice, traded with his own flesh and blood, was just a hideous scar in that woman's eyes. Leo's gut-wrenching love was nothing but a smokescreen for her to siphon money, and a stepping stone for her crimes. They didn't just want to steal his assets. They wanted to throw my son behind bars, letting Leo bear the brand of a money launderer and rot away behind iron bars while they lived it up on some distant horizon. I looked up at Martha's photo resting on the cabinet. Her gentle smile seemed tinged with sorrow. "Martha, if you can hear me, please close your eyes for a while," I whispered in the dark, my teeth grinding together. "Because, for what I'm about to do to this demon, there will not be a single ounce of mercy." The pain had made way for absolute fury. A ruthless, unforgiving net had begun to weave itself in the mind of a father who had nothing left to lose. The next morning, I stepped out of my bedroom with a face as still as a frozen lake. Clara was standing in the kitchen, bustling about frying eggs and humming a trending song from the internet. She turned around, giving me a sickly sweet smile. "You're up, Dad. I'm making breakfast for you and Leo." Looking at that smile, my stomach violently lurched. The hands hidden in my coveralls balled into tight fists, my nails digging deep into my palms to stop myself from lunging forward and crushing the throat that was spewing those lies. I merely nodded, mumbled a greeting, and walked straight out to the docks. I pieced together my ruthless plan meticulously and coldly, exactly the way I aligned every gear in a heavy-duty crusher. To lure a monster out of its cave, the bait must be bloody and reek of money. I asked an old friend who used to work in port management to print out a few customs authority forms for me. Back at the shop's office, I personally stamped a bright red, confidential seal on the cover. Inside was a forged incident report stating that my storage yard No. 4 had just received an abandoned smuggling speedboat. The crucial point lay in the handwritten note in red ink at the corner of the page. Discovered $500,000 in untraceable cash hidden in the soundproof bulkhead. Temporarily locked down at yard number 4. Not yet reported to superiors pending inventory count. That evening, Leo had to work the night shift at the shop to catch up on the delayed schedule. It was just Clara and me at home. I intentionally left the door to my home office ajar, placed the file on the desk, slipped it under an ashtray so the red text would immediately catch the eye. Then, I picked up the landline, dialed an automated weather service, but spoke loudly, as if I were secretly conspiring with a port official. "Are you sure about this, port manager?" I lowered my voice, but kept it loud enough to drift out into the hallway. $500,000 in untraceable cash. All right, just leave that speedboat exactly where it is, in my yard number 4. It's fenced all the way around, no cameras, and no one ever pays attention to that scrapyard. This weekend, we'll quietly move it. The moment I hung up, I caught a dark shadow darting past the half-open door. The fish had smelled the blood. I casually told Clara I had to go to the shop to check on a water pump and left the house. But in reality, I circled around the back and climbed into my pickup truck parked 2 blocks away. From my phone screen, connected to the hidden camera I had just planted in the office, I watched her every move. Just as I predicted, barely 5 minutes after I left, Clara pushed the door open. She turned on a small flashlight and flipped frantically through the file on the desk. Her eyes glued to the $500,000 figure. In the dark, I could clearly see her bright red lips trembling with excitement. Her hands, adorned with fancy fake nails, continuously snapped photos of every page with her phone. She immediately called Marcus. This time, I didn't need the doorbell camera. My hidden audio bug transmitted their conversation loud and clear. "Marcus." "Change of plans," Clara hissed, choking on her own overwhelming greed. "Forget that slow drip of money laundering through that cripple's shop. The bank and the cops could raid it at any second. I just found our way out." Marcus barked back from the other end. "Are you crazy? The plan is running." $500,000, Marcus. Untraceable cash. Clara cut him off, breathing heavily. "Old man Elias is hiding a smuggled speedboat in that scrapyard number 4. No guards, no cameras. In the middle of nowhere. Tomorrow night, bring bolt cutters and 2 trusted muscle guys. We're sweeping that cash and flying straight to Mexico." Marcus went silent for a few seconds, clearly blinded by the $500,000 figure. "What about Leo? If we bounce right now, his business accounts will blow up with all that unlaundered crypto money. The financial feds will tear him apart." My lips twitched, waiting for the answer from the woman my son had loved with his very life. "Then let them tear him apart," Clara spat sharply, without a trace of hesitation, without a single drop of pity. "That's the price he pays for daring to tie me to this impoverished life reeking of motor oil." While he goes to prison for us, we'll have plenty of time to vanish. Tomorrow night 2:00 a.m. No more arguing. The phone clicked off. Clara proudly smoothed her hair, smiling triumphantly at the file, as if she had just grasped the whole world in her hands. In the dark cabin of my pickup truck, I squeezed my eyes shut. Enough. This play didn't need a single line of dialogue more. It was time for the curtain call, and I would make certain that anyone who despised my son's heart would pay a price worse than death. 1:30 in the morning. Thick sea fog rolled in, swallowing the sickly, yellow streetlights at the harbor. The bone-chilling cold of the autumn night was nothing compared to the murderous aura surging in my chest. I knocked on Leo's door. He stumbled out of bed, his eyes sunken from lack of sleep, his hand still rubbing the abdominal area where his transplant scar ached. "Leo, put your jacket on. The alarm at yard no. Vor just tripped. Someone broke in," I said curtly. Leo jumped, suddenly wide awake. He hurriedly grabbed his worn canvas jacket. As he walked past the master bedroom, he didn't forget to slow his steps, glancing back into the darkness to whisper, "Make absolutely sure not to wake Clara. She's been having trouble sleeping lately, and her health is still weak since the miscarriage." I turned my face away, clenching my jaw so tightly I nearly bit my tongue to keep from cursing aloud. "Right up to the very end, you only care about that demon Leo." I drove the rattling pickup, headlights off, creeping silently into the pitch-black alleyway directly across from yard number 4. Leo sat in the passenger seat, tightly gripping a large heavy-duty wrench, his eyes fixed tensely on the rusted corrugated fence. "Dad, we should call the cops. The thieves at the docks are dangerous," Leo whispered. I killed the engine. The silence was eerie, save for the sound of waves crashing against the stone embankment. I pulled the detective's file out of my breast pocket and tossed it into Leo's lap. "Turn the dome light on and read it," I ordered coldly. Leo looked at me in bewilderment, then shakily switched on the dim cabin light. Pages flipped. The pawnshop receipt clearly listing his mother's gold ring. The transaction statements from the fraudulent crypto exchanges. And finally, the fake medical certificate bought online for $20. "Dad, what is this, Clara? The miscarriage was fake. And the ring," Leo's voice shattered, both hands trembling violently. He looked at me with the pleading eyes of a child begging an adult to tell him this was just a cruel joke. Before I could answer, a black SUV rolled up quietly from the end of the road, stopping dead right in front of the gate to yard number 4. 3 dark figures stepped out, 2 burly men carrying bolt cutters. And walking behind them, wearing the designer wool coat that Leo had mortgaged the shop to buy, was Clara. Leo's jaw dropped. He reached for the door handle to charge out, but I clamped my hand down hard on his shoulder, pinning him to the seat. At the same time, I reached over and flicked on the truck's Bluetooth speaker, connecting it directly to the microbug I had planted on the yard's gate that afternoon. Static crackled, and then Clara's shrill voice pierced the confined space of the cabin. "Hurry up, Marcus. Cut this rusty chain. There's no alarm. That old man is completely tech blind." The voice of the man named Marcus rang out, laced with mocking laughter. "This place reeks. It's disgusting. How did you manage to endure it all these years just to keep up your cover, Clara?" Leo turned to stone. The wrench slipped from his grasp, clattering dryly against the floorboard. The grinding friction of the bolt cutters chewing through the iron chain shrieked. Through the speaker, every subsequent word out of Clara's mouth turned into a poisoned dagger, plunging deep into my son's bleeding heart. Just for this $500,000, my love, and for the perfect family cover. If it wasn't for that dummy shop, how would you have laundered all that dirty money? Clara sneered. Didn't your husband suspect anything? He treats you like a queen after all, Marcus asked. Him? He's pathetically stupid, Clara hissed venomously. Imagine this. He tears up his college acceptance letter, donates a kidney to his dying old mother, just to walk around with a repulsive scar on his stomach. Every time we have sex, when my hand brushes against that wrinkly, bumpy scar, I just want to vomit. He thinks buying me a car makes up for wasting my youth. This $500,000, plus leaving him behind to take the fall for our money laundering, consider it compensation for my emotional distress. Snap! The iron chain broke. But that sound was nothing compared to the sound of something shattering entirely inside my son. The file slipped from Leo's hands, scattering across the floor. He dropped his head onto the steering wheel. There was no roar of outrage, no frantic thrashing. Leo just wrapped both arms tightly around his own abdomen, the place that held the monumental scar of a mother's love, the scar he was once proud of, now trampled, disgusted, and degraded by the woman he loved most. A choked sob tore from Leo's throat, like the cry of a wounded, dying beast trapped in a dark corner. The boy wept, tears streaming down his face, soaking the steering wheel. Love, trust, sacrifice. All of it had been thrown into the black mud by that woman and mercilessly stomped upon. Watching my son curl up in agony, my chest felt like it was being ripped open. I reached out my old, calloused arm and pulled Leo's violently shaking shoulders toward me, resting his head against my shoulder, just like when he was a little boy. Cry, son. Let the tears wash away all these lies, I whispered, my bloodshot eyes turning coldly toward yard number 4. And from this moment on, let your father show them the true price of hell. A cunning fraudster like Marcus wouldn't rot in prison just for picking the lock on a rundown warehouse. I knew that perfectly well. The legal system is full of loopholes for those with money. Therefore, the trap I set wasn't just a simple bait for greed. It was a death sentence for their lives. When I received the file from the detective, I immediately contacted a senior agent of the DEA, the very agency that had been leasing my yard No. 4 as a covert staging ground for the past 3 years. When I mentioned the name Marcus, the agent was stunned. It turned out Marcus wasn't just a petty crypto scammer. He was a ghost, laundering money for South American drug cartels that the DEA had been frantically hunting without evidence. I handed the DEA the perfect excuse to collar him. Marcus was bringing armed gunmen to attack a federal storage facility, to steal evidence in the U.S., breaking into and attacking a federal government facility with weapons, carries charges akin to domestic terrorism, and sabotaging national security. The sentencing framework isn't measured in months, but in decades without parole. From the camera feed in my truck, I watched coldly as the rusted corrugated gate shrieked when it was kicked open. Clara followed Marcus, her stiletto heels crunching on the gravel. They shined their flashlights, eagerly advancing inside, absolutely certain they would find a speedboat stuffed with $500,000. But when the rotting wooden doors were pried open, the smile on Clara's lips froze. There was no speedboat. Before them stood a solid, heavy-duty steel blast door, embossed with the eagle insignia of the U.S. Department of Justice, and a glaring red warning: federal property, restricted area, no trespassing. Marcus halted, his eyes wide with terror as he realized he had just stepped into a death trap. Motherfucker! It's a setup, fall back. Now, he screamed. But it was too late. The moment the tips of their shoes crossed the sensor line, the silent alarm tripped. There were no blaring sirens. Instead, massive high-intensity floodlights hidden on the telecom poles around the yard flared to life in unison, tearing apart the night and turning the scrapyard into blinding daylight. From the dark alleys surrounding the yard, 6 unmarked armored vehicles that had been lying in wait suddenly roared to life, surging forward to block every possible exit. Dozens of DEA agents strapped with assault rifles and bulletproof vests flooded the yard like a tidal wave. Red and blue police strobes flashed relentlessly, blinding and lethal. Federal agents, drop your weapons. Get on the ground. The authoritative shouts echoed off the metal walls. The 2 hired thugs Marcus brought instantly threw down their bolt cutters and handguns, obediently dropping face down onto the dirt, hands behind their heads. But what happened next was the thunderous slap that shattered Clara's every delusion. Facing a life sentence for attacking a federal facility, Marcus, the suave lover, the man who just moments ago was casually promising to whisk Clara off to Europe in luxury, revealed the most cowardly and despicable nature of a sewer rat. He didn't protect his lover. Quite the opposite. Driven by vile survival instincts, Marcus violently grabbed Clara by her elaborately styled hair, yanking her back in front of him as a human shield. Get back all of you, or I'll snap this bitch's neck," Marcus screamed maniacally. He wrapped one arm tightly around Clara's throat, while his other hand whipped out a switchblade, pressing it tight against her windpipe. "Marcus, what the hell are you doing? Let me go," Clara shrieked, her meticulously made-up face now contorted and pale with asphyxiation and sheer horror. "Shut up, you stupid whore. You set me up. You were going to sell me out to these cops so you could swallow the cash yourself, weren't you?" Marcus snarled, spitting right into the face of the woman he had called babe just minutes before. In the exact second Marcus lost focus while screaming, the sharp crack of a taser cut through the air. The blue arc of electricity shot across the space, embedding right into Marcus's shoulder. He convulsed violently, dropping the knife and collapsing onto the dirt. Clara was thrown aside. She pitched forward face first. The arrogant face she wore every day slammed straight into the jagged gravel. The expensive wool coat, the one bought with blood, with a kidney, with Leo's exhausted sacrifice, tore open, instantly soiled with mud and trash. Agents immediately swarmed her, pinning Clara's arms behind her back and locking them tight with cold steel handcuffs. "No, you have it wrong. I have nothing to do with this. I'm a victim. He forced me," Clara wailed pitifully, clawing at the dirt. But there were no camera lenses here for her to perform her act for views, and no naive husband ready to drop to his knees and believe her lies. There were only cold gun barrels and the contemptuous glares of law enforcement. Inside the pickup truck, the sounds from the scene still echoed clearly. Leo had stopped crying a while ago. The boy sat straight up, his red, swollen eyes now as still and cold as ashes. He stared intently at the woman pinned to the ground over there. Clara had heartlessly trampled on a man who was ready to die for her, just to chase after a piece of scum who treated her like nothing more than a dog-meat shield, a worthless rag thrown aside at the first sign of trouble. The truth was exposed so nakedly and brutally that no words could ever describe the full extent of her humiliation. "Aaliyah," I spoke in a low, gravelly voice, flicking off the microphone switch. "It's done, son. It's all over." Leo didn't answer immediately. He slowly let his hands drop from where they had been tightly clutching his stomach. He took a deep breath of the salty ocean air and looked up at me. In those eyes, the blind innocence had been completely incinerated by the fire of truth. All that remained was the hardened gaze of a man who had just walked through the graveyard of his own faith. "Yes, Dad." Leo's voice was deep, hard, cold, and decisive. "Let's go home. Trash isn't worth another second of our time." 3 days after the fateful night at Yard No. 4, Leo and I sat across from each other at the old dining table in the kitchen. The silence was broken only by the ticking of the pendulum clock. Suddenly, Leo's phone buzzed. The incoming call displayed an unfamiliar number. Leo looked at me. I gave a slight nod. He swiped the screen and put it on speaker. An automated voice announced a collect call from a federal detention center. Immediately after, Clara's chaotic voice blared through the speaker, high-pitched, frantic, and drenched in tears. She was starting up her classic theatrical performance once again. "Leo, oh Leo, you picked up." "Thank God," Clara sobbed uncontrollably. "You have to save me. Bail me out of here. Call a lawyer for me. It's all a misunderstanding. That bastard Marcus tricked me. He held a knife to me and forced me to go with him. I didn't know anything about that scrapyard. Leo, you know how fragile I am. I'm so terrified." Leo sat entirely motionless. His gaze drifted through the air, settling on the photo of his mother on the shelf. He didn't interrupt, just let Clara's crocodile tears flood through the phone speaker for another 2 minutes. Finally, when she paused to catch her breath, Leo slowly spoke. His tone was icy, devoid of emotion, lacking even a sliver of pity. "My mother's ring. How much did you sell it for?" The other end of the line went dead silent. The suffocating silence dragged on. Clara's excuses died in her throat. She knew the final mask had been ripped away. "Say hello to your fake fetus for me," Leo continued, every word as sharp as a razor. "The blind man you once deceived died right alongside that fake child the other night. Never call this number again." Leo pressed end. Blocked the number. He didn't shed a single tear. This battle, this torment, it ended here. That very afternoon, Leo filed for an at-fault divorce on the grounds of his wife committing a serious felony. There would be no miracles for Clara or her lover. With the audio recordings I provided, combined with being caught red-handed carrying weapons during an assault on a covert DEA facility, both faced federal court. The judge denied bail. They were sentenced to over 20 years in federal prison, without the possibility of parole. From a flashy KOL, dripping in luxury items bought with the blood and tears of others, Clara now had nothing left but an orange jumpsuit and 4 cold concrete walls. No one to cheer her on, no social media, just a long, endless sentence for her bottomless greed. 6 months passed. The storm had moved on, leaving wreckage in its wake, but it had also swept away the rotting roots. After getting rid of the financial leech, Leo's repair shop bounced back rapidly. He worked hard, his health gradually stabilized, and a smile returned to his lips whenever he welcomed his regulars down at the docks. One weekend afternoon, I called Leo back to the house. On the kitchen table, I placed a small wooden box, no bigger than my palm. Leo sat down, looking at me in confusion. "What is this, Dad?" "Open it, son." Leo carefully lifted the lid. Nestled neatly on the red velvet lining were two things: a tarnished gold engagement ring set with a small stone, and a brass safe key. Leo's eyes widened, his breath catching. He shakily picked up the ring, pressing it tightly to his chest. "Mom's ring. I thought it was gone forever. Dad, how did you find it?" I smiled, hiding my tightly clenched hands under the table. I didn't tell him that I had hired the detective to scour every black market pawnshop for 3 months straight, and to buy back this priceless family heirloom from an antique mobster. I had quietly sold my most prized possession, my beloved pickup truck, the vehicle that had been with me for 20 years, the one that had driven Martha through our hardest days. But a truck, no matter how good, is just iron and steel. This ring was the soul of our family. I tipped my chin toward the brass key. A mechanic who spent his life tearing down engines knows one rule very well: never store your treasure where greedy people can easily find it, especially in places that bear your own name. Leo looked baffled. "What do you mean?" "Over 20 years ago, when your mother first got sick, we knew the future would be very dark. We quietly set up a small trust fund, solely in your name, completely separate from this house or the shop at the harbor. Clara spent a whole year hunting for a phantom fortune in a scrap yard, completely unaware that your real inheritance was sitting quietly under your name this whole time, protected by layers of legal ironclad paperwork she could never have anticipated." Tears welled up in the corners of Leo's eyes. But this time, they weren't the bitter tears of betrayal. They were tears of warmth, of infinite gratitude. He lunged forward and hugged me tightly. I patted my son's broad back, feeling the steady heartbeat of his pure, resilient heart. Early Sunday morning, the two of us grabbed a couple of cold beers and walked out to the wooden pier behind the shop. The sea breeze ruffled my graying hair. The eastern horizon blazed a glorious orange, heralding the start of a new day. The scars both on Leo's body and within our souls would still be there, testaments to the pain we had survived. But the most important thing was that the foundation built on lies and greed had entirely collapsed. In its place stood the unshakable harbor of family, something no scheming hands could ever steal away.